Welcome to Healthcare Musings, a podcast dedicated to the discussion of critical care, the medical field, and healthcare in general. Here is your host, Dr. Hesham Hasabala. Okay, happy to have you with me. All right, big news in healthcare law that I wanted to kind of go over. I wrote about it in the past, and now it's back in the news. So in January of this, not this year, in January 2023, the Federal Trade Commission proposed a new rule banning non-compete clauses in employment contracts. What a non-compete clause is, and this is kind of along the same lines of my Getting a Job series, and I wanted to save it about non-compete clauses. What a non-compete clause is, it's a part of the contract that says you agree not to do the same line of work for a competing entity for a specified amount of time and a specified amount of distance. Or, for example, you agree, for me as critical care, I agree not to be an intensivist for any other hospital within 10 miles for 2 years. Okay, that's a non-compete clause. Now, the Federal Trade Commission proposed a new rule banning these non-compete clauses in employment contracts. And according to the FTC, these clauses, quote, constitute an unfair method of compensation and therefore violate Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act. The chair of the FTC, Lina Khan, said, quote, the freedom to change jobs is core to economic liberty and to a competitive, thriving economy. Non-competes block workers from freely switching jobs, depriving them of higher wages and better working conditions, and depriving businesses of a talent pool that they need to build and expand. By ending this practice, the FTC's proposed rule would promote greater dynamism, innovation, and healthy competition, unquote. In April, actually on April 23rd of this year, in 2024, the FTC made that rule final. They had a public comment period, and it's expected to go into effect in 4 months. So, and immediately after the final rule was announced, it was attacked by industry groups, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, for one, is planning to sue the FTC over the rule, claiming that this is a power grab and a constitutional overreach. In a statement to Becker's Healthcare, the General Counsel of the American Hospital Association, Chad Golder, said the following, quote, the agency's stubborn insistence on issuing this sweeping rule, despite mountains of contrary legal precedent and evidence about its adverse impacts on the healthcare markets, is further proof that the agency has little regard for its place in our constitutional order. Now, I have very mixed feelings about non-competes. Okay, so back in last year when it was first proposed, there were some people in our field that were in favor of it. So, for example, Dr. Jeremy Peterson, who was a family physician practicing in Minnesota, he wrote the following, quote, although I am professionally and personally fulfilled with my current practice and the community I serve, there are physicians and providers who do not enjoy the same luxuries as me. Non-compete clauses ultimately infringe on physician well-being, which opens in a new tab, which then cascades into suboptimal patient care. Sorry about that, unquote. So, and the point is, if you hate your job for whatever reason, and you're bound by the non-compete that to stay in that job, and you can't go down the street, which has a better opportunity for you and your family, that's going to lead to a physician mental health problems and likely burnout. And I get that. Dr. Peterson also said the following, quote, If a circumstance arises where I no longer wish to carry on my employment status with my current healthcare organizations, I will be faced with a terrible choice. I will have to choose between either uprooting my family and severing the community bonds I have built within my personal and professional roles, commuting further than the 3.5 miles I currently drive to a clinic outside of my non-compete agreement in a community I have no personal engagement within, or roll the dice and set up a practice in my community and beg for my non-compete clause to not be enforced. I cannot imagine how a fully vested and seasoned family physician could navigate this choice, unquote. I get that. I get that completely. In fact, I had a colleague who was stuck in a horrible job. She hated her job, hated her employer, hated the practice, but their non-compete was so obnoxious that it forced her to go all the way down south, hundreds of miles, literally hundreds of miles south of where she was for 2 years. And she sucked it up for so long. Incidentally, the problem is these kind of non-competes come and bite you in the butt later, because once her kids grew up, she did exactly that. Went down and worked for 2 years, came back to the same hospital and competed against them successfully and took business from them. So obnoxious non-competes like this ultimately backfire. And actually, a lot of judges in a lot of states, including the state of Illinois, um, don't like these non-competes, and actually when faced in litigation will actually side with the person against who the non-compete is being enforced. And in some states, such as California, non-competes are illegal altogether, right? But I think what the FTC is trying to do is to cover the entire country. That's the one side, and I totally get that. And I know colleagues who are just upset about non-compete and non-solicit, which are very similar kind of things. Clauses in employment contracts, because it really feels that they're hamstrung and they're stuck in a situation that they don't want to be in. On the other side, at the same time, as someone who recruits and hires physicians and APPs, I get why you'd want a non-compete clause. For a clinician, it's very expensive to hire a clinician. You pay a sign-on bonus, most likely. You spend thousands of dollars to get them credentialed with insurance companies, credentialed with hospitals, onboarded and trained and hired. You're teaching them your own practice secrets, and for them then to learn the business, learn how to be whatever clinician they are, and then leave and go down the street and open up a competing shop and compete against you is not business smart for any business. No one wants to hire someone for them and then to be their competition. Okay, so the non-compete clause protects against people learning the skill and then going out and competing against you. That's what they're protecting the practice, right? That's what they're intended to do. They're and like a non-compete for a fast food worker. That's what I mean. That seems. I never even knew that they existed. A barista or a cook or even wait staff. That doesn't make any sense to me. All right, right? You just got to compete in the marketplace and pay what the marketplace is paying, and we do that for physicians and APPs, right? I just don't want to spend all this money hiring a physician or an APP, and then they go out and work for my competition down the street. And sometimes I can't change my practice to accommodate what they want, right? And there are some workers that actually will take advantage of the fact that there's no non-compete and keep going from job to job to job to job, getting sign-on bonuses and moving on and on. Ultimately, that's going to backfire, because if I have someone that's been in 6 jobs in 2 years, I'm not going to hire that person because I don't think that they're reliable. So that goes both ways, right? So I asked a healthcare executive who asked to be anonymous, and he said, quote, "I think it is a complex topic. We never prohibit people from making a living. It just can't be at the detriment of our company." Period. Unquote. He also said, quote, "I think the bigger issue is how do we prevent competitors from just taking a big group of our docs to sell the same service to an existing client? That is the one thing I have always struggled with. Clearly, trade secrets, etc., are hard to legally protect in the real world. The non-compete is a more concrete way to protect trade secrets at least for a period of time, unquote. See, I get that. You're trying to protect your trade secrets, right? A lot of tech companies, your things are under development, things are still unpatented, and then you just go and you'll go to a different competition and just learn what you bring. A lot of companies are trying to protect that. And that's what the non-compete is trying to do. I asked a retired healthcare physician executive about them, and he said this, quote, "It takes a lot of investment to bring a physician into a practice. Once this investment is recouped by the health system, I think it is reasonable to no longer have a non-compete clause. How long would this take? 5 years? 10 years? That is still unclear." Right? Now that makes more sense, right? I think if I've demonstrated loyalty, I've been with my current practice this is my 13th year, right? I think I've earned the right to not have a non-compete. I've demonstrated to you my loyalty. Something changes, something happens. I have to move out of state, or I have to move to a different place out of my control. I think that I get, right? That it's not fair. And I think that I am fully in favor of maybe like a buyout of your non-compete after a certain amount of time. I think my employer has definitely gained the not that I'm planning to leave. Anybody listen to this, I'm not planning to leave. I'm just saying in general, I think that makes a lot of sense that, if you've demonstrated your loyalty, you've been with the company 10, 15 years, I think you've earned a right to possibly buy out a non-compete, right? That makes more sense. And like throughout my entire career, I've always been subjected to non-competes. It's just part of the business, and I get it, and I get it from both sides. That's why I think this rule by the FTC just doesn't take into account the nuance that is in the real world, and very toxic and obnoxious non-competes actually they actually push them out of the market. So there are practices when I came out of fellowship that I completely did not join because I knew their non-compete was that obnoxious and that ridiculous. And I just don't have the time to go through litigation or the money. And so I'm not going to apply for those jobs. Right. And so I really think there should be a balance, right? A regional non-compete clause, such as not practicing in the same specialty or in the same hospital or hospital system for 2 years, should be allowed. Maybe you can work on the distance requirement, and that makes sense. Or have a sunset after a certain amount of years. That after 5, 6, 10 years, maybe the non-compete will sunset. And you know what? This is an employment agreement we talked about in my previous podcast episodes about, getting a job. This is not like scripture set in stone. This isn't the 10 commandments on the tablets from Mount Sinai. These are negotiable. And I think you should be able to negotiate with your employer. Listen, I plan on staying here long term. I love the practice. I love the community. I love the hospital. But if something were to happen, maybe my non-compete can sunset after 5 years or 6 years or whatever, or maybe work on the distance, maybe not 10 miles, make it 3 miles, right? So all of this is negotiable. Now, going back to the FTC final rule, there is definitely going to be litigation, and it's unclear whether this will ever be implemented in the near future. And we'll see how this is going to affect the healthcare market, which is already struggling with staffing shortages. So I'm very interested in seeing what happens with respect to this rule and the definite litigation that's going to follow. But in general, I really think this is, just like many things in real life, there's balance and nuance, and it's not all black and white. And it's just unfortunate that the FTC just comes down without taking this nuance into account. They kind of address it like healthcare executives or just executives who make more than $151,000 with policy making decisions, quote unquote, or are not subject to the ban on non-competes. We'll see how companies interpret that. So more to come here, and we'll see how this goes. Thanks for your time and attention. And until next time, this is Dr. Hashem Hasabala signing off on the Healthcare Musings podcast.